Hi everyone! Today we will be diving into the next episode in my Witcher Netflix episode breakdown series, so episode 3, Betrayer Moon. If you don't know me, or maybe you're just now stumbling into my videos, hi! My name is Magitek, and I am a really big fan of the Witcher universe. I've read the books, I played the games, and I'm just overall very fascinated and just love the world of The Witcher, so I like to talk about them in these videos. I'm currently doing a series where I kind of deep dive into each episode and just kind of have a discussion about things in the episode, the things that I liked or just random observations that I had, and just talking about it with all of you. So without further ado, let's dive into episode 3, Betrayer Moon.
Point me to Temeria.
This episode has one of my favorite Geralt stories in the entire season. This is where Geralt goes to Temeria and fights the Striga, Princess Ada. And this story is an iconic story. The Striga is an iconic monster in the Witcher universe, and so I was very excited when we finally got to this episode, and I was like, yes, the Striga fight is here.
Then someone came. The usurper, and he rallied the people, and they took back what was theirs. I say we follow the lead!
You can't kill the Kudlak. So you decide to kill your king? Great plan.
So I like that part where these Temerian residents, these angry Temerian residents, are talking about how much their king sucks, but they bring up a little bit of Nilfgaard history with the previous emperor of Nilfgaard being taken over by a usurper, which is accurate. I really wish that they could have deep dived into Nilfgaard's backstory a little bit more. I'm assuming in later seasons this might be something that they do because it is pretty important, and I think right now Nilfgaard is just kind of like this evil nation and we don't really know the full backstory there, but they kind of explain it a little bit here in this Temeria scene, so kind of interesting. So the whole intro to Temeria and Geralt arriving is a little different from how it is in the books. I think it paints a clear picture of what is going on, and I think that part is pretty accurate. The kingdom of Temeria is pretty unhappy with King Foltest. You know, shit's not exactly going great there. This is also the episode where we first meet Triss Merigold. I have a video where I do talk about certain characters and if I liked or disliked them, and I'm kind of neutral on the portrayal of Triss, but something more recently came to light for me that this news, if true, is actually kind of interesting, and it makes me like this Triss character even more. So there is talk online that Triss is a hybrid character of Triss Merigold and Yennefer from the books. And Yennefer is a priestess of Melitele. And Yennefer is somewhat important in Geralt's story in different parts of his life, and she's very mothering and caring for Geralt. She takes care of Geralt in his time of need after the Striga does attack him. She's described as kind of an older woman who takes care of Geralt, more like a motherly figure, grandmotherly figure even. She's not at all so far in the show. So if, you know, this is following the timeline of the books, we would have already met Mother Yennefer a little bit. I don't know if the showrunners have actually confirmed that Triss is a hybrid character of Yennefer and Triss, but if that is the case, I think that's kind of interesting, and I am actually okay with that as a viewer. That doesn't bother me, and I think that's actually kind of a cool idea. Would I like for there to be a Yennefer and a Triss? Sure. But if it is the case that that this Triss is supposed to be a little bit of Yennefer and a little bit of Triss, that kind of makes more sense for her appearance and how she looks and how she interacts with Geralt. I think that that actually makes a lot of sense, and I think it's kind of cool. And if that's the case, we should all keep that in mind when we're all, because I feel like the Triss actress has gotten the most complaints out of anybody else. Like, everybody is hating on Triss. I think it's good to have this in consideration when looking at the Triss in this show, that she may be two characters in one. And yeah, I've already talked about this a little bit in my other video where I talk about some of the minor characters in the Witcher universe, but I am not the biggest fan of the portrayal of King Foltest in this moment. I always saw King Foltest, in my mind, as a bit of a wiser, more keen and younger, handsome type of a king. That is how in the short story The Witcher, where we first meet King Foltest, and it's literally the first short story of The Last Wish, this story. And he's pretty smart. He catches on to the fact that, people are suspecting things about him, and he catches on to that really quickly. And they don't really have that kind of portrayal here for King Foltest, but maybe, this is like a lower time for him. He's kind of at his lowest of lows at this point. Maybe he'll, step up a little bit as king, because later on in the book series, all of the nobility who are, gathering and talking about the situation of the world, King Foltest always is a little bit of a sharp guy who has, and I don't know, I always liked his dialogue in the book, so I wasn't all that impressed with the Foltest here. So I love this whole scene where Geralt uncovers the big twist of the story, I would say, is that it wasn't actually Ada and Foltest's mother that cursed the child, but it was actually Lord Ostrit here, who was in love with Ada. And Geralt uncovers it because he says, your scent was on her sheets. That's something that's like a subtle way of telling us all, the viewers, that Witchers have this keen sense of smell that they use in their heightened senses, so that Geralt is he's a great detective, first of all. And he has done a lot of detective work in his stories because of his keen senses. For example, in the games, you know that Geralt has heightened senses because you use Witcher senses as an ability. But if you're somebody who is just watching this show and doesn't really know a lot about the universe, this is something that you can catch on to very quickly because you realize that he has these heightened senses. I sort of like this part of the Yennefer story. There's some parts of it that are a little slow, in my opinion, but we get a little bit more of Yen and Istrid's relationship here. There's a reference to Bernard, which is another magical school that usually trains the male mages. So Istrid is a student of Bernard, and she mentions it here. So that's a nice little reference for people who are into the lore like myself. However, it's also interesting that in this dialogue, Yennefer is saying that the sorceresses are always changing their appearance to make themselves look beautiful when they go to court, etc., etc., and that the men don't really change their appearances, which isn't fully accurate. It's described in the books that the women usually do make their appearances look like young, beautiful women, usually in their 20s. And with magic, males will usually make themselves look a bit more older and wiser, and maybe like in their 40s, or, kind of these older, wiser men. Oh man, and the episode eventually leads us to the actual Striga fight, which is 100% one of my most favorite parts of this entire show, is the entire battle between Geralt and the Striga. First of all, it's very suspenseful from a viewing perspective. It is kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's very horror inflicting and very spooky. And then when they actually show the Striga, she's pretty scary and horrifying and gruesome. And just honestly, the way that this fight happens, it is so much how I pictured it in my head when I was reading the story. I think that this story, more than any of the other stories, shows how Geralt fights monsters in this world, and that monster hunting is not exactly an easy job, and he gets paid not a lot for his work, and he's struggling paycheck to paycheck, but this is not an easy job here. So just like in the books, Geralt hides himself in the crypt until the sun rises, to make sure that this Striga can transform back. So rather than killing it, he does transform the Striga back into the Princess Ada. And again, just like in the books, Geralt's guard is down just for a second when he checks on the princess. She is so... The results of becoming a Striga and going back to being a human, your brain is just, you've known nothing than being a monster for all this time. So the minute she transforms back and she sees Geralt, she attacks him. She brutally attacks him, and this is what makes Geralt pass out, basically. And that is exactly how it happens here. I just absolutely love it. This is, this whole portrayal of everything was just really, really on point. For people who maybe have read the books and really wanted to get like that accurate story, this is, in my opinion, one of the more accurate things that they did for any of the tales told in this show as far as adaptations go. So I didn't talk too much about Yennefer's storyline within this episode, but this episode is basically her transformation in a nutshell. And I think overall the transformation of Yennefer was pretty good, pretty brutal also. And this kind of shows the results of the magic in work. It's at this moment Istredd is like, shit, I should not have betrayed that. You made a mistake, Istredd. Teseya too. Y'all shouldn't have doubted Yennefer of Vengerberg. Okay, but back to Geralt's story again. This scene is where Triss is waking him up and helping him out, and he references Renfri many times in this series, and this is another time where he, talks about Renfri's prophecy and, references her in his unconscious state. And I don't know, it is kind of interesting that he brings up Renfri again. She clearly in this show had a major significant impact on Geralt as a character. I think more so than it ever did in the books. It was at this point where I realized that Renfri was much more of a significant character to Geralt than she ever was in the books. So going back to what I had said earlier about Triss's character, this is where I think more than anything, it justifies the notion that she may be a little bit of Nenneke and a little bit of Triss here, because she's the one who's curing Geralt's wounds after he's attacked by the Striga, when normally in the books that was Meletile who was helping him. And right here she mentions that I've arranged for her to stay with the Sisters of Meletile. So she has some connections with Meletile, and that might be a little bit of a hint here that this may be Mother Nenneke, or Nenneke may still be at the Temple of Meletile where she's supposed to be. Who knows? But right now, in this moment, this makes me realize more than any other time that Triss may be this hybrid character. And also, Triss goes on about this whole fate and destiny thing that is clearly a common theme in the show, but is also a common theme within the books itself. But it's just kind of re-emphasizing that whole thing about destiny. And it's funny enough that this talk of destiny happens, and it immediately cuts to the only scene in the entire episode that we see of Ciri. So it's making you as a viewer kind of think about that, like, okay, there's some sort of destiny thing at play here, and it has to do with Ciri. So yeah, that's basically the end of this episode. I feel like I didn't have as much to talk about in this episode as I did the first two. I think overall it was a pretty strong episode. I obviously had high praise for all of Geralt's storyline here. And then, yeah, the focus on Yennefer's story was good, but I didn't really have a lot to say about it because a lot of it is new, original stuff that the writers put into her storyline that isn't exactly accurate, but I've said this before, I think it's done pretty well. The dynamic between Yennefer and Istredd is good, and I love the relationship between Teseya and Yennefer. But ultimately, I think the strongest part of this episode was the Geralt storyline. The iconic Striga fight and the entire story, I think, was really, really great and done very well. After watching it a second time, I feel like my hype went down a little bit. I kind of watched it as a normal person, and I was like, okay, I think that's cool. This episode's cool. But I think the first time I watched it, I was like, this is amazing, the best thing ever. But that's about it. Let me know your guys' thoughts on episode 3, if you liked it, if you didn't like it. what parts you may or may not have liked. I always enjoy discussion on the show, and I'm looking forward to talking about some of the upcoming episodes because I feel like I do have a lot more things to say in some of these later episodes. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.